The Wellington Hotel buzzed with excitement on that cool autumn evening. Golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over the ballroom, as waiters in crisp black uniforms weaved through crowds of elegantly dressed people. Tonight was special. Anton Volkov, the pianist whose recordings sold millions worldwide, had just finished a performance that left the audience breathless. The after-party was in full swing. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter bubbled up from different corners of the room, and everyone who mattered in the city's music scene seemed to be there. Anton stood near the center of the largest group, his tall figure easy to spot. His dark hair was slightly messy in that perfect way that looked accidental but probably took effort. When he smiled, people around him leaned in closer, eager to catch every word. "The third movement is always the hardest," he was saying, swirling champagne in his glass. But tonight it felt like the piano was playing itself. The people surrounding him nodded as if they understood exactly what he meant. A woman in an expensive blue dress touched his arm and said something that made the group laugh. Anton was used to this, the admiration, the touching, the way people looked at him as if he were something more than human. On the other side of the ballroom, near a large arrangement of white lilies, stood Lena Petrova. She clutched a small handbag and looked around with wide eyes, clearly out of place among the wealthy music lovers and critics. Her dress was simple, dark green with a modest neckline, and while clean and neat, it clearly wasn't designer-made like those around her. Lena hadn't expected to be here at all. She worked at the local library, spending her days helping children find books and organizing community events. Last week, she'd entered a radio contest on a whim while driving home. The question had been about Rachmaninoff's birthplace, and she'd known the answer immediately. The prize, tickets to Anton Volkov's concert and the exclusive after-party, had seemed like something from a dream. Now, standing alone in the corner of this glittering room, Lena felt increasingly uncomfortable. She'd been to the concert, had sat in the back row and closed her eyes as Anton's music filled the hall. That had been magical. This party, though, made her feel like an imposter. She wondered if she should just slip out quietly when no one was looking. "Ah, you must be our radio winner." Lena turned to see a woman with a clipboard and an earpiece. Her name tag read, "Vivian Torres, event coordinator." "Yes," Lena replied softly. "I'm Lena." "Wonderful. Come with me," Vivian said, taking Lena's elbow gently but firmly. "Part of your prize is meeting Mr. Volkov." Before Lena could protest, she found herself being led across the room. People glanced at her curiously as she passed, some whispering behind their hands. Lena felt her cheeks grow hot. The gap between her and these people seemed vast, not just in terms of money but in belonging. These were people who attended gallery openings and charity galas every weekend. People who discussed classical music over brunch. As they approached Anton's circle, Lena considered making an excuse and leaving. But it was too late. The crowd parted, and suddenly she was standing face to face with the man whose music had moved her to tears just hours ago. Up close, Anton Volkov was even more handsome than he appeared on album covers. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, and faint lines at the corners suggested he smiled often. Right now, though, his expression was polite but distant, the look of someone meeting yet another fan. "Mr. Volkov," Vivian said brightly, "this is Lena Petrova, our radio contest winner." She correctly identified Rachmaninoff's birthplace. Anton's eyebrows rose slightly. "Novgorod Governorate," he said. "Not many people know that," Lena nodded. "I've always loved Russian composers." There was a moment of awkward silence. The people around Anton watched with barely concealed impatience, waiting for this interruption to end so they could reclaim his attention. "Do you play?" Anton asked, clearly making small talk. Lena hesitated. "A little," she answered. Someone in the group chuckled softly, and Lena's embarrassment deepened. She knew what they were thinking. A librarian who dabbles at the piano, probably playing simple tunes for children during story time. Perhaps Anton heard the laugh too, because something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or mischief. He straightened his shoulders and gestured toward the grand piano that stood in the corner of the ballroom. "Why don't I play something for you?" he offered, his voice carrying enough to make nearby conversations pause. "Something simple. A little thank you for being such a dedicated fan." The way he emphasized simple made it clear what he thought of her musical understanding. Around them, people exchanged glances, some smiling behind their hands. "Oh, that's not necessary," Lena began. But Anton was already moving toward the piano, and the crowd was following. Sensing entertainment, the black Steinway gleamed under the chandeliers. Anton sat on the bench and flexed his fingers dramatically. A hush fell over the growing audience. "Any requests?" he asked Lena, who now stood uncomfortably at the front of the crowd. Before she could answer, a man's voice called out, "Play the minute waltz." "Something our contest winner can appreciate." More chuckles. Anton smiled and positioned his hands over the keys. "Actually," Lena said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice, "I've always loved Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." Anton paused, looking at her with slightly more interest. "Opus 9, number 2, a popular choice." He began to play, his fingers dancing over the keys. The beautiful, dreamy melody filled the room. Anton played flawlessly, but there was something showy in his performance. He looked up at the audience several times, smiling as if to say, "See how easily I can do this?" When he finished, applause broke out. Anton stood and took a small bow. "Would you like to try?" he asked Lena, gesturing to the piano bench with an exaggerated sweep of his arm. The question caught her off guard. The crowd murmured, expecting her to politely decline. "I couldn't possibly," Lena started. "Please." "I insist," Anton said, his tone making it clear he expected her to fumble through a simple piece at best. It would make a charming story. The master kindly allowing an amateur to touch his instrument. Vivian looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Volkov, perhaps we should continue with the scheduled—" No, Anton interrupted. "Music is for everyone, isn't it? Not just professionals." He turned to Lena again. "Just a short piece. Whatever you feel comfortable with." Lena stood frozen. Everyone was watching. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting for her to embarrass herself. Part of her wanted to walk away, to disappear into the crowd and then out the door. But another part, a part she thought she'd buried years ago, stirred to life. "All right," she said quietly. As Lena approached the piano, she noticed tiny details she'd missed from a distance. A water ring on the polished wood, sheet music neatly stacked on one side, the slight unevenness of one key. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands in her lap, taking a deep breath. Anton stood nearby, arms crossed, a small smile playing on his lips. The room had grown completely silent now, the anticipation almost tangible. Lena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she no longer saw the crowd or felt their judgment. She only saw the keys, black and white, familiar and waiting. Her hands rose and hovered over the keyboard. She hadn't performed in front of people in so long, but as her fingers touched the cool ivory, something inside her remembered. Time seemed to slow down. The first notes hung in the air like drops of water before a rainfall, and then she began to play, not a simple piece, not a beginner's exercise. Her fingers found the opening chords of Bach's Prelude in C major from the well-tempered clavier. The flowing arpeggios emerged clear and confident, each note precisely weighted. Behind her, she heard someone gasp. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Anton's crossed arms slowly drop to his sides. Lena's shoulders relaxed as muscle memory took over. The piece wasn't flashy or technically difficult compared to what Anton had played during his concert, but her interpretation was thoughtful, mature, each phrase shaped with care and understanding. As the final harmonies resolved, Lena let her hands rest on the keys for a moment before placing them back in her lap. She hadn't meant to challenge Anton or surprise the crowd. She had simply played the way she always did when alone with her small upright piano at home, with her heart open to the music. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then Anton stepped forward, his expression completely transformed. Gone was the condescending smile, replaced by genuine curiosity and something else. Surprise, perhaps even respect. "Where did you study?" he asked, his voice much quieter than before. The question hung in the air between them as the crowd leaned in, eager to hear the answer from this mysterious woman who had just shattered all their expectations. The silence in the ballroom felt electric. Lena's fingers still tingled from touching the piano keys. She hadn't meant to create such a moment, hadn't planned to play Bach with such emotion. It had simply happened, like a bird taking flight after being caged too long. "Where did you study?" Anton repeated, leaning closer. Lena smoothed her dress, suddenly aware of all the eyes watching her. "Moscow," she said quietly. The conservatory? A long time ago. This caused a ripple of whispers through the crowd. The Moscow Conservatory was among the most prestigious music schools in the world. Its graduates performed in famous concert halls across Europe and America. Studying there wasn't something one mentioned casually. It meant you had been considered among the best young musicians of your generation. Anton's expression shifted from surprise to genuine curiosity. He studied her face as if seeing her for the first time. "You played beautifully," he said, all traces of his earlier condescension gone. An older man with silver hair pushed through to the front of the crowd. He wore an impeccably tailored suit and had the confident air of someone used to being listened to. "Thomas Reed," he introduced himself, extending his hand to Lena. "I'm the director of the Philharmonic Society." That was unexpected. Lena shook his hand, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. "Thank you. Bach is just the beginning, isn't it?" Anton said, not really asking but stating what he somehow knew. "What else do you play?" Lena hesitated. Part of her wanted to downplay her abilities, to retreat back into the comfortable shadows where she had lived for so many years. But another part, the part that had just tasted freedom after a long drought, pushed her to answer honestly. "Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Liszt." She paused. "I've always loved Liszt." Anton's eyes lit up. "Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2? Lena smiled for the first time since arriving at the party. "Too flashy for my taste. I prefer the Consolations." Anton laughed, a genuine laugh that transformed his face from handsome to almost boyish. "Of course you do." He glanced at the piano, then back at Lena. "Will you play again? Something of your choosing this time." The crowd had grown larger now. Word had spread through the ballroom that something unusual was happening at the piano. Hotel staff paused in their duties to listen. Even the bartenders had stopped mixing drinks. "I don't know if I should," Lena said, suddenly self-conscious again. "Please," Anton said, and this time there was no mockery in his voice, only genuine interest. Lena took a deep breath and turned back to the piano. She had not performed in public for so long, at least not like this, not for a crowd of sophisticated music lovers and critics. The children at the library who sometimes gathered around when she played the old upright in the reading room were a different audience altogether. As she sat down again, she felt a curious mix of fear and excitement. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned them over the keys. What should she play? Bach had been safe, structured, precise. But now that her secret was out, now that they knew she wasn't just a lucky contest winner who could pick out a simple tune, without conscious decision, her fingers began the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The piece started quietly, almost contemplatively. But Lena knew what was coming, the building intensity, the technical challenges, the emotional storm that made this piece one of the most difficult in the piano repertoire. As the music flowed from her fingers, Lena forgot about the crowd again. She forgot about Anton watching. She forgot about the years she'd spent hiding her talent. There was only the music, beautiful, complex, and alive. Her hands moved across the keyboard with a dancer's grace, finding the difficult passages with muscle memory she didn't know she still possessed. When the piece reached its thunderous climax, she didn't hold back. Her small frame seemed to grow larger as she poured every ounce of herself into Chopin's masterpiece. The final notes hung in the air like the aftermath of a summer storm. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She had forgotten what this felt like. To give yourself completely to the music, to let it move through you like electricity through a wire. For several seconds, no one made a sound. Then a woman near the front began to applaud. Others joined in, until the entire ballroom erupted in enthusiastic clapping and exclamations. Someone whistled. Someone else shouted, "Bravo!" Anton stood motionless, his face a complex mixture of emotions, admiration, confusion, and something that looked almost like envy. Thomas Reed, the Philharmonic director, pushed forward again. "My dear," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, "where have you been hiding? I know most of the serious pianists in this country, but I've never heard of you." Lena stood up from the piano bench, feeling oddly lightheaded. "I don't perform," she said. "Not anymore. But why?" A woman in the crowd called out. "You're extraordinary." More questions followed, voices overlapping. "Did you study under Mikhailov at Moscow? Have you recorded anything? Do you teach master classes?" Anton raised a hand and surprisingly the crowd quieted. I think we're overwhelming our guest, he said. He turned to Lena. Would you like some air? The terrace is usually empty during these events. Grateful for the escape, Lena nodded. Anton guided her through the crowd, which parted reluctantly, people still murmuring and watching her with new interest. Several tried to hand her business cards, which she awkwardly accepted and tucked into her small purse. The terrace was indeed empty. The autumn night was cool but not cold, and the city spread out below them, a tapestry of lights against the darkness. Lena took a deep breath of fresh air and felt her heartbeat slowly returning to normal. Thank you, she said simply. Anton leaned against the stone balustrade. You're welcome, though I should be thanking you. He looked out at the city lights rather than at her. It's not often I'm surprised like that. Lena didn't know what to say, so she remained silent, also gazing out at the view. You said you don't perform anymore, Anton finally said. Why is that? You have a remarkable gift. The question touched a tender spot Lena had protected for years. She almost gave her usual vague answer, the one she gave to curious parents at the library when they asked why she didn't play professionally. Instead, she found herself wanting to tell the truth. Stage fright, she said. The crippling kind. I was 22, about to graduate from the conservatory. My final recital. Career-making moment, she paused, the memory still vivid after all these years. I walked onto the stage, sat at the piano, and my mind went completely blank. My hands froze. I couldn't remember the first note of a piece I'd been playing for months. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, I stood up, walked off stage, and never performed in public again. Anton was looking at her now, his expression serious. One bad experience ended your career? Lena shrugged. It wasn't just that day. The anxiety had been building for years. The pressure, the competition, the constant feeling that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong among the truly gifted. She gave a small, sad smile. After that final disaster, I just let it go, moved back home. Started working at the library. I still play, at home for the children sometimes. But not like tonight. Not like that. But you clearly belong among the gifted, Anton said, his voice unusually gentle. What I just heard in there, that wasn't just technical skill. Many pianists have that. You have something rarer. You have soul when you play. Lena felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. Coming from someone of Anton's stature, it meant something. Still, she shook her head. It doesn't matter now. That part of my life is over. Anton turned to face her fully. Is it? Because it didn't look over in there. It looked very much alive. The door to the terrace opened before Lena could respond. Vivian, the event coordinator, stepped out, looking flustered. Mr. Volkov, I'm sorry to interrupt, but people are asking for you, and she glanced at Lena. They're asking if Ms. Petrova would play again. Anton raised an eyebrow at Lena. What do you think? Once more for an eager audience? Lena felt a flutter of panic. I don't know if I can. You already did, Anton pointed out. Twice, and brilliantly. That was different. I wasn't thinking about it. I just played. Anton smiled. Then don't think about it this time either. Just play. He held out his hand. Maybe we could play together, a duet. The offer hung in the air between them. Not a challenge this time, but an invitation. An opportunity Lena had thought was long past. Behind them, the city lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth. Ahead, through the glass doors, the crowd waited, buzzing with excitement about the library worker who played like an angel. Lena looked at Anton's outstretched hand, then up at his face. The arrogance she had first seen there was gone, replaced by something much more interesting, respect. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. The moment Lena's hand touched Anton's, she felt a jolt of something unexpected. Not romance, but a kind of recognition. It was the connection that exists between people who share the same passion, who understand what it means to lose yourself in music. Together, they walked back into the ballroom. The crowd parted for them, whispers following in their wake. Lena caught fragments of conversations. Studied in Moscow. Never heard playing like that since. Where has she been all these years? The grand piano waited for them, its lid fully open now, reflecting the golden light from the chandeliers. Anton guided Lena to the bench and sat beside her. The proximity made her nervous in a different way than performing did. This was intimate, sharing the same small space with someone whose music she had admired for years. What shall we play? Anton asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Lena thought for a moment. Do you know Schubert's Fantasia in F minor? For four hands? Anton smiled. Of course. Though I usually play the secondo part. So do I, Lena admitted. Then today I'll take the primo. Unless you'd prefer— No, Lena said quickly. You take the higher part. Anton nodded and positioned his hands. There was no sheet music, but neither of them needed it. This was a famous piece, one that serious pianists learned early and never forgot. They looked at each other and Anton gave a slight nod to establish the tempo. Then with perfect synchronization, they began. The piece opened with a haunting melody that Anton played with delicate touch. Lena's accompanying chords provided the foundation, steady and supportive. As the music developed, their hands crossed occasionally, moving in a choreographed dance across the keyboard. What struck the audience immediately was how well they played together. Despite never having practiced, they anticipated each other's interpretive choices, adjusting dynamics and tempo with the intuition of longtime musical partners. When Anton lingered over a phrase, Lena waited. When Lena pushed the tempo slightly in the more passionate sections, Anton followed seamlessly. For Lena, the experience was transformative. The paralyzing fear that had ended her career was nowhere to be found. Instead, she felt a deep calm, anchored by Anton's presence beside her and the beauty of Schubert's music flowing through them both. The Fantasia moved through its sections, from melancholy to playful to triumphant and back again. As they neared the end, returning to the poignant theme from the beginning, Lena felt tears threatening. Not from sadness, but from the pure joy of making music with someone who understood it as she did. The final notes faded into silence. For a moment, neither Lena nor Anton moved, both reluctant to break the spell they had created together. Then the room erupted in applause, more enthusiastic and genuine than anything heard earlier in the evening. Even after Anton's solo performance, Thomas Reed, the Philharmonic director, approached them with undisguised excitement. Extraordinary. Simply extraordinary. I haven't heard the Fantasia played with such understanding in years. Others crowded around, offering praise and asking questions. A woman who introduced herself as a music critic for the city newspaper wanted to interview Lena. A professor from the local university music department handed her his card, mentioning master classes and guest performances. Through it all, Anton stayed by her side, his earlier arrogance replaced by a kind of protective attentiveness. When the questions became too many, he would deflect attention back to the music rather than Lena's personal story. Eventually, he guided her to a quiet corner where a server had set up 2 glasses of water. Thank you, Lena said, taking a grateful sip. For everything, Anton shook his head. No need for thanks. That was— he seemed to search for the right word. That was a gift. For me as much as for them. He looked at her with new eyes. Not as a famous pianist addressing a fan, not as a master indulging an amateur, but as one artist recognizing another. Why the library? He asked suddenly. After Moscow, after all that training, even with the stage fright, there are other paths in music, teaching at a conservatory, recording, composing. Lena ran a finger around the rim of her water glass, considering the question. No one had asked her that before, why she had chosen such a different path. After what happened at my final recital, I couldn't face the music world, she explained. I was ashamed, humiliated. I felt like a failure. She paused, remembering the dark months that followed. I went home to my small town, took the library job temporarily just to pay rent while I figured things out. And then, Anton prompted gently when she fell silent. Lena smiled softly. Then I discovered something. The children who came to the library, many had never heard classical music before, never seen anyone play piano up close. When I played for them during story hour, their faces— She shook her head, still moved by the memory. It wasn't about technique or interpretation or reviews. It was just about the music in its purest form. Anton nodded slowly. And that was enough? The question wasn't judgmental, but it cut to the heart of something Lena had asked herself many times over the years. Most days, yes, she admitted. I love the library. I love the children. I still play at home every evening. She looked toward the piano they had just left. But tonight, playing like that again, I'd forgotten what it feels like. Before Anton could respond, Vivian appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Volkov, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's nearly midnight. The hotel manager says we need to begin wrapping up the event." Anton nodded. "Of course." He turned back to Lena. "Don't leave yet. There's something I want to discuss with you." As he moved away to speak with the event staff, Lena found herself approached by an elderly woman with kind eyes and a cascade of silver hair. "My dear," the woman said, taking one of Lena's hands in both of hers. "I taught piano for 40 years before retiring. What you did tonight was special, not just the technical skill, but the heart behind it." Lena smiled. "Thank you. May I ask why you stopped performing? Someone with your talent?" It was a question Lena had answered several times already that evening, but something in the woman's gentle manner made her give a more honest reply. "Fear," she said simply. "Not just of the stage, but of not being good enough. Of being exposed as somehow fraudulent." The woman nodded knowingly. "Do you know how many gifted musicians I've seen destroyed by that same fear? Too many to count." She squeezed Lena's hand. "But it would be a terrible waste if the world never heard you play again." As the woman moved away, Lena stood alone for a moment, watching the party wind down around her. Staff began clearing empty glasses. Guests gathered coats and bags, still buzzing about the unexpected performances they had witnessed. Lena felt oddly disconnected from her normal life, as if she had stepped into someone else's story for the evening. Tomorrow she would return to the library, to her quiet apartment with its second-hand upright piano, to the rhythm of her everyday existence. Yet something had shifted inside her. A door she had firmly closed years ago had been nudged open again. Anton returned, 2 business cards in hand. "First," he said, handing her one, "Thomas Reed wants to speak with you about a possible recital with the Philharmonic Society. Small venue, intimate setting. He's very interested." Lena took the card automatically, but shook her head. "I don't think I can. Tonight was different. I wasn't prepared, wasn't thinking about performing. An actual planned recital?" The familiar anxiety fluttered in her chest at the mere thought. "Which brings me to my idea," Anton said, giving her the second card, his own. "I'm starting a series of workshops next month. Not traditional master classes, but something more exploratory. Working with talented pianists who face barriers, technical, emotional, psychological, helping them find their way back to the music." Lena looked at the card, then up at him. "And you think I need help finding my way back?" "I think," Anton said carefully, "that you have an extraordinary gift. Whether you choose to share it through formal performances, recordings, teaching, or playing for children at the library, that's entirely your choice. But I also think that fear shouldn't be the deciding factor." He gestured toward the piano. "What happened tonight when we played together? You didn't seem afraid then." "That was different," Lena said again. "Yes," Anton agreed. "It was, and maybe that's the key." Around them, the ballroom had nearly emptied. Only a few guests remained, lingering by the door, still discussing the evening's unexpected turn of events. "Think about it," Anton said. "The workshops start in 3 weeks. 4 weekends, small group, no pressure. Just musicians helping each other pass their obstacles." Lena tucked both cards into her purse. "I'll think about it." "And the recital?" Anton asked, a hint of his former confidence returning in the slight tilt of his head. Lena couldn't help but smile. "One impossible thing at a time, please," Anton laughed. "Fair enough." He glanced at his watch. "May I call you a car?" "It's late. No need. I drove myself." This seemed to surprise him slightly, as if he'd assumed someone who worked at a library and played Chopin like an angel wouldn't also do something as mundane as drive a car. They walked together toward the exit. At the grand doorway of the ballroom, Anton stopped. "Promise me one thing," he said. "What's that?" "That you won't disappear again. That even if you decide against the workshops and the recital, you won't vanish back into your quiet life as if tonight never happened." Lena considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I promise." As she walked away, she felt lighter somehow, as if she'd set down a burden she'd been carrying for years. The music was still inside her, had always been there. And for the first time in a very long time, she was curious about what might happen if she let it out again. 3 days had passed since the night at the Wellington Hotel. Lena sat at her desk in the children's section of the library, organizing next week's story time schedule. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop to the quiet rustle of pages and occasional whispered conversations. Everything looked the same as it had before. The colorful bookshelves, the small round tables, the worn carpet with its pattern of planets and stars. Yet Lena felt different, as if she had returned from a journey that had changed her in ways she couldn't quite explain. "Ms. Petrova?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Lena looked up to see Zoe, a shy 7-year-old who visited the library almost daily. "Yes, sweetheart? Will you play the piano today, please?" Zoe clutched a picture book about a dancing bear to her chest. The old upright piano sat in the corner of the reading area. It was nothing like the magnificent Steinway at the hotel. The finish was scratched in places, some keys stuck occasionally, and it hadn't been tuned in months. But the children loved when Lena played during story hour. "Of course," Lena said, smiling, "after I finish this schedule." Zoe nodded happily and scampered off to join the other children. Lena's phone buzzed with a text message. It was the third time Anton had reached out since the party. The first message had simply thanked her for the unforgettable duet. The second had included details about his workshop. This one was different. Local arts paper running story about our performance. Reporter asking for interview with you. Interested? Lena stared at the message, her heart racing. An interview would mean questions about her past, about why she had disappeared from the music scene, about what she planned to do now. It would make everything so public. She set the phone down without replying. Later, she told herself. She would think about it later. At 4 o'clock, Lena gathered the children for story hour. About a dozen kids settled onto the cushions arranged in a semicircle in front of the piano. Parents and caretakers sat in chairs along the wall, some scrolling through phones, others watching with fond smiles. "Today we're reading The Bear Who Loved Music," Lena announced, showing the colorful cover that Zoe had selected. She read with animation, giving each character a different voice. The children leaned forward, caught up in the story of a bear who discovered an old piano in the forest and taught himself to play. When she reached the part where the bear performed for the first time in the big city, Lena moved to the piano. Her fingers found the keys, playing a simple, cheerful melody that matched the mood of the story. The children's faces lit up at this familiar part of story time, when the words in the book became real through music. As Lena played, her mind drifted to Anton's workshop. 4 weekends, he had said. Small group, no pressure, just musicians helping each other pass their obstacles. What would it be like to play regularly with other serious pianists again, to discuss interpretation and technique, to be part of that world she had left behind? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After story time, as the children dispersed and parents gathered backpacks and jackets, Lena noticed someone standing by the library's entrance. A tall figure with unmistakable posture, straight-backed but not stiff, confident but not arrogant, Anton. He wore casual clothes, dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, so different from the formal attire of the gala. Without the crowd of admirers around him, he seemed more approachable, more human. Lena walked over to him, aware of curious glances from library patrons who recognized the famous pianist. "This is unexpected," she said when she reached him. Anton smiled. "I was in the neighborhood for a meeting with the symphony board. Thought I'd stop by instead of texting again. How did you know where I work? You mentioned the name of your library that night." It wasn't hard to find. An awkward silence fell between them. Anton broke it first. "I heard you playing just now." "For the children." "Story time," Lena explained. "Nothing fancy. It was lovely. Different from Chopin and Bach, but genuine." Lena glanced at her watch. "My shift ends in 20 minutes. Would you like to get coffee? There's a place next door." Anton nodded. "I'd like that." Half an hour later, they sat by the window of a small cafe, steam rising from their mugs. Rain continued to fall outside, blurring the streetlights that had just come on as evening approached. "You haven't responded about the interview," Anton said after they had settled in. Lena wrapped her hands around her mug, absorbing its warmth. "I'm not sure it's a good idea. May I ask why?" She considered how to explain. "My life here is uncomplicated. I'm just the library lady who plays piano for the kids. If there's an article, people will know who you are," Anton finished for her. "Who you were," Lena nodded. And they'll expect things. They'll want to know why I left music, why I work at a library, what I'm going to do next. And you don't want to answer those questions? I don't know the answers myself, she admitted. Anton took a sip of his coffee. Have you thought about the workshop? I've thought about little else, Lena said with a small laugh. And? Lena looked out at the rain. I'm scared, she said simply. Not just of performing again, of hoping again, of wanting something I might not be able to have. Anton was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Would it help if I told you my story? Lena looked at him curiously. Your story? Why I started these workshops. It wasn't entirely altruistic. Anton set down his mug and flexed his right hand, stretching the fingers one by one in what Lena recognized as a pianist's habitual movement. 3 years ago, I started having pain in my hand, he began. Nothing dramatic, just a dull ache after long practice sessions. I ignored it. Pushed through. Had a major tour coming up, couldn't afford to take time off. Lena nodded. She had known many musicians with similar stories. By the time I finished the tour, I could barely move these 2 fingers. He wiggled his 4th and 5th fingers. Doctor called it focal dystonia, neurological condition that affects musicians, especially pianists. Essentially, the brain starts sending wrong signals to the muscles from overuse. That's terrible, Lena said softly. Anton shrugged. It happens. More often than people realize. The real problem was what came after. Depression, identity crisis, the works. Who was I if I couldn't play? What was I worth? The parallels to her own experience were not lost on Lena. How did you recover? Physically? Months of specialized therapy, retraining my hand movements, learning new techniques. Mentally, that was harder. I had to rebuild my relationship with music from the ground up. Had to find a way to love it again without defining my entire worth by it. He looked directly at Lena. That's what the workshops are really about. Not just technique, not just performance anxiety. They're about finding a healthy way back to the music when something has separated you from it. Lena felt a lump form in her throat. And have you? Found your way back? Anton flexed his hand again. I still have pain sometimes. Still have to be careful. But yes, I've found a new path. Different from before, but maybe better in some ways. More balanced. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain creating a gentle soundtrack to their conversation. The first workshop is next Saturday, Anton said. No pressure, no expectations. Just 6 pianists working together. You'd be the 7th if you joined. Lena took a deep breath. Let me think about it. Really think about it this time. Anton nodded. Fair enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Before I forget, Thomas Reed asked me to give you this. Lena opened the envelope. Inside was a formal invitation to perform a 20-minute set at the Philharmonic Society's Rising Stars Showcase. Despite the irony of that title for someone her age. This is in 3 months, she said, looking at the date. Plenty of time to prepare, if you decide to do it. That's a big if, Anton smiled. 1 step at a time, right? Think about the workshop first. After they said goodbye, Lena walked to her car in the rain. She sat behind the wheel for a long time without starting the engine, the invitation on the passenger seat beside her. That night, she did something she hadn't done in years. She moved the coffee table in her small living room, positioned a chair in the center of the space, and played her old upright piano, as if performing for an audience. No stopping when she made mistakes. No going back to fix difficult passages. Just playing straight through, piece after piece, until her fingers ached and her soul felt lighter. When she finally went to bed, she had made her decision. Saturday morning found Lena sitting in her car outside a converted warehouse in the Arts District. The building housed several music studios, including the one where Anton's workshop would take place. She checked the time, 15 minutes early. She could still drive away. No one would know. Her phone buzzed with a text. Anton, coffee's ready inside. And there are pastries. Chocolate ones. Lena smiled despite her nerves. He had guessed she might be sitting outside, gathering courage. With a deep breath, she got out of the car and walked to the entrance. The door was heavy, industrial. She pulled it open and stepped into a bright hallway with polished concrete floors and exposed brick walls. Music drifted from behind several doors. A violin somewhere, vocal scales from another room, a jazz combo rehearsing down the hall. Studio C was marked with a simple sign. Lena paused outside, her hand on the doorknob. Then she remembered the feeling of playing with Anton at the gala, the freedom, the joy, the sense of coming home after a long absence. She opened the door. Inside, 6 people turned to look at her. Anton stood by a table with coffee and pastries. Beside him was an older man Lena recognized as one of the city's most respected piano teachers. The others were unfamiliar. 3 women and 2 men of various ages, all with the distinctive focused look of serious musicians. "Lena," Anton said, smiling. "Welcome." As she stepped fully into the room, Lena noticed the centerpiece, a magnificent grand piano, lid fully open, gleaming under the studio lights. "Sorry I'm late," she said, though she wasn't. "You're right on time," Anton replied, handing her a coffee. "We were just about to begin." Looking around at these strangers who shared her passion, her fears, her love of the instrument that had shaped her life, Lena felt something unexpected, a sense of belonging. Whatever happened next, whether she ever performed publicly again or not, she had taken the first step back to the music that had always lived inside her. And for today, that was enough. 3 months passed in a blur of Saturdays at the workshop, weekday evenings at her piano, and the familiar rhythm of library days in between. Lena had forgotten what it felt like to be so completely immersed in music, not just playing it but discussing it, breathing it, living it alongside others who understood. The workshop had turned out to be nothing like the competitive environment she remembered from her conservatory days. The 7 pianists, each carrying their own struggles and barriers, formed a supportive community. There was Yulia, recovering from a wrist injury that had sidelined her for 2 years. Daniel, a brilliant technician who froze when playing from memory. Nora, who had given up performing to raise her children and was finding her way back after 20 years. And there was Anton, not the polished, somewhat arrogant figure from the gala, but a thoughtful mentor who shared his own vulnerability with the group. He spoke openly about his focal dystonia, about the days he couldn't play at all, about learning to value himself beyond his abilities at the piano. Today was different from their usual Saturday sessions. Today was the Philharmonic Society's Rising Stars Showcase, and Lena, after much deliberation and encouragement from the group, had agreed to perform. She stood in the wings of the small recital hall, peering out at the gathering audience. The venue held only about 100 people, but to Lena, it might as well have been thousands. Her heart hammered against her ribs and her hands felt cold despite the warm June evening. "Nervous?" Anton's voice came from behind her. Lena turned, managing a shaky smile. "Terrified," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Remember what we talked about? You're not performing for them. You're sharing something you love." It had become a mantra in their workshop, this idea that performance wasn't about impressing an audience or proving your worth, but about sharing a moment of beauty, a conversation through music. What if I freeze again? The question that had haunted her for years slipped out. "Then you'll take a breath, find your place, and continue," Anton said simply, "and we'll all still be here afterward." The stage manager approached, clipboard in hand. "5 minutes, Miss Petrova." Lena nodded, her mouth too dry for words. "I'll be right in the front row," Anton said, squeezing her shoulder gently. "Just look at me if you need a friendly face." As he walked away to take his seat, Lena closed her eyes and tried the breathing exercises they had practiced in the workshop. Slow inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Exhale for 8. Ground yourself in the present moment. The reality was that she had prepared thoroughly. She knew her program inside and out. Bach's Prelude in C major, the piece she had played that first night at the gala, followed by 2 of Chopin's nocturnes, and finishing with Debussy's Clair de Lune. 20 minutes of music that had become part of her over the past 3 months of dedicated practice. "Ms. Petrova?" "We're ready for you." Lena opened her eyes. It was time. The walk to the piano seemed endless. The lights were dimmer than she expected, the audience a soft blur of faces. She found Anton in the front row as promised. Next to him sat the other workshop participants, and her heart gave a small leap. The entire children's librarian staff from her branch, along with some of the regular parents and kids from Storytime. Zoe, the little girl who always requested piano music, waved excitedly when she caught Lena's eye. Lena sat at the bench and adjusted it slightly. The piano was a beautiful instrument, Not as grand as the one at the gala, but with a warm, singing tone she had come to love during rehearsals. She placed her hands in her lap, taking one more deep breath. The silence in the hall hummed with expectation. This was the moment, the same moment where, years ago, her mind had gone blank and her fingers had frozen. Lena raised her hands to the keyboard. For a terrible second, she felt it happening again, the disconnection, the panic rising in her throat. Her vision blurred slightly. Then she caught sight of Zoe's face in the front row, eyes wide with excitement. The little girl gave her a thumbs up, the same gesture Lena often gave her when she completed a difficult book during library time. Something in Lena settled. She smiled, placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The Bach flowed from her hands with a clarity and poise that came from months of renewed discipline. She had always loved the mathematical precision of Bach, the way the notes interlocked in perfect patterns. As she played, the familiar anxiety began to recede, replaced by the simple joy of creating something beautiful. Moving into the Chopin, Lena allowed herself to lean into the emotional heart of the music. These were pieces about longing, about night thoughts and quiet revelations. She found herself thinking not of technique or of the audience, but of her journey these past months, the return to something she had loved and lost and found again. By the time she reached the Debussy, Lena was no longer performing. She was simply playing, sharing a piece of music that had always seemed to her like moonlight made audible. Her body swayed slightly with the gentle rise and fall of the phrases. Her fingers found the keys without conscious thought, muscle and memory and emotion working together in perfect harmony. The final notes of Clair de Lune hung in the air like a question, then faded into silence. For a moment Lena remained still, hands hovering above the keys, reluctant to break the spell. Then the applause began, warm, enthusiastic, genuine. Lena stood and turned to face the audience, her cheeks flushed, a smile breaking across her face. She bowed once, twice as the applause continued. In the front row, Anton was on his feet, applauding with undisguised pride. Beside him, Zoe was bouncing up and down, clapping with the uninhibited enthusiasm of childhood. As Lena left the stage, legs shaky with adrenaline and relief, she was met in the wings by Thomas Reed, the Philharmonic director who had first approached her at the gala. "Magnificent. My dear," he said, clasping her hand warmly. "Just magnificent. We must talk about future performances." More people surrounded her, the other workshop participants offering congratulations, audience members who had made their way backstage, even a local music critic who wanted a quote for his review. Through it all, Lena felt strangely calm. The paralyzing fear that had defined her relationship with performance for so many years had not disappeared entirely. She had felt its echo at the beginning, but she had moved through it rather than being stopped by it. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the other performers had taken their turns on stage, Lena found herself sitting with Anton in the now empty recital hall. "So," he said, "how does it feel to be back?" Lena considered the question. "Different than I expected. I was so focused on the fear, on whether I could get through it without freezing. I didn't think about how it would feel to connect with the audience again." "And how did it feel?" Like, Lena searched for the right words. "Like finding a piece of myself I thought was gone forever." Anton nodded. "That's how it was for me too when I started playing again after my diagnosis. Like reuniting with an old friend." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Thomas Reed wants me to do a proper recital in the fall," Lena said. "Solo program full length. Will you do it?" Lena smiled. "I think so. One step at a time, right?" "And the library?" Anton asked. "Will you keep working there?" "Absolutely," Lena said without hesitation. "Those kids taught me something important. That music isn't just about virtuosity or perfect performances. It's about connection, joy, sharing something meaningful." She ran her fingers lightly over the piano keys without pressing them down. "I don't have to choose between being a librarian who loves music and being a pianist who loves books. I can be both," Anton laughed softly. "The world does try to put us in neat little boxes, doesn't it?" "It does," Lena agreed. "But I'm done with boxes." The next afternoon found Lena back at the library for Sunday story hour. Word had spread about her performance. Several parents approached with congratulations. having heard about the recital from friends or seen the glowing review in the morning paper. "Are you going to be famous now, Ms. Petrova?" Zoe asked as the children settled onto their cushions. Lena smiled as she opened the picture book for the day. "No, sweetheart. I'm just going to be me, but maybe a slightly braver version than before." She read the story with her usual animation, giving each character a distinct voice. When she reached the musical part of the tale, she moved to the old upright piano in the corner. Its tone was nothing like the magnificent instruments she had played recently. Some keys stuck slightly, and it desperately needed tuning. But as Lena's fingers brought the story to life through a simple melody, she realized something important: the joy she felt playing here, for these children with their wide eyes and open hearts, was no less real or valuable than what she had experienced on stage. Later that evening, Lena sat at her own piano at home. On the music stand was a new composition she had begun working on, her first attempt at writing music in years. It was a simple piece inspired by story time, by the wonder on children's faces when they encountered something beautiful. As twilight deepened outside her window, Lena played through what she had written so far, then added a new phrase, then another. The music flowed naturally, without force or strain, each note a small piece of the story she was learning to tell again, not just through the works of great composers, but through her own unique voice. The journey back to music had not been a straight line. There had been difficult moments in the workshops, days when the old fears threatened to overwhelm her again. There would be challenges ahead, too. The full-length recital, the questions about what came next, the balance between her different worlds. But sitting there in the gentle evening light, fingers moving across the keys of the instrument that had always felt like home, Lena knew one thing with certainty. Whether playing for hundreds in a concert hall or for a handful of children at the library, whether performing Bach or improvising simple tunes for story time, she had found her way back to the heart of what mattered, the music itself, and the joy of sharing it with others, and that, she realized, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.